Hello, everyone. It's great to see everyone again. Our Unifor family gathered here to celebrate, recharge our energies, and get ready for the fights ahead to defend our members and push for gains for all working people. It's been a very busy time since our convention in 2019, and it's not an overstatement to say that the world has literally changed in so many ways. We've been pushing governments at all levels on important issues, from better health and safety to EI reform, for better pandemic programs, to anti-scab legislation, and continued organizing. The work never stops, and the pandemic never stopped us either. We've seen ongoing bargaining with some amazing results. We've seen industries either go boom or bust, and in many cases an uneven recovery that we're still going through, with many workers still facing layoffs or a lack of hours. We've had Unifor strikes for justice and amazing victories in collective agreements involving workers in so many sectors. And now, in some sectors like the courier and the airlines industry where they are overworked, workers are still facing the pandemic head-on. Before I go further, I have to also give a shout-out to our colleagues and my friends from Quebec. J'essaie de dire quelques mots en français, veuillez donc excuser mes erreurs. Unifor compte également de nombreux membres francophones dans l'Ouest canadien, y compris dans les conseils scolaires catholiques francophones de l'Alberta. J'ai énormément de respect et d'appréciation pour la tradition forte et militante du militantisme syndical au Québec, et vous êtes une source d'inspiration pour nous tous. J'ai particulièrement admiré votre solidarité, votre intégrité et votre travail pour recruter de nouveaux membres. Je suis solidaire avec vous tous. Continuons à devenir le syndicat dont nous sommes tous fiers, notre grand syndicat Unifor. Solidarité. There is so much going on in the Western region across 4 provinces and 2 councils, but before I go any further, I would also like to thank Leanne Marsh and Guy Deforge, our BCRC and PRC chairs, and the executives and committees of those regional councils, and of course, all our amazing staff who work so hard every day with our local unions and members. I get the privilege and honour to report out to you, but as always with our union, it is nothing but a team effort. We've also shed a lot of tears in the past few years at the human carnage of the pandemic and the massive economic impacts on our members and their families. From the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been almost daily requests from our national representatives, local union presidents, and workplace health and safety committees for help to deal with the pandemic. COVID safety protocols, safe return to work programs, contact tracing protocols, work refusals, and ultimately, fatalities. Many thanks to all the Unifor health and safety reps for their hard work, including our director, Sari Saranen, Vinay, Ken, Emil, and so many others, and to all the safety reps in all the workplaces who stepped up to protect our members like never before. The pandemic has also only increased concerns about financial security in retirement. Nearly 1 in 4 Canadians now say that the pandemic has affected their timeline to retirement, and they will have to work longer to address the shortfalls. I would like to acknowledge the solidarity and support of all of our retired workers who have participated in solidarity actions for locals that have been on strike or locked out. Retired worker chapters and their members have gone to Regina, Winnipeg, Alberta, and elsewhere, and we thank you. We also thank all the retired members and staff for their amazing service to our union. Thank you. Now, many of you have heard me talk about the premiers across the West. 3 terrible premiers and 1 nice guy, my friend BC Premier John Horgan. One thing is clear in the West. The Prairie Premiers failed workers before, during, and after the pandemic. Even though we saw terrible performance pre-COVID by Jason Kenney, Scott Moe, and Brian Pallister, they sure doubled down during the pandemic and showed how incompetent and ideological they truly are, even when people were dying at higher numbers than needed. Yet now, we have seen Jason Kenney in Alberta forced to step down as his own anti-worker party, the UCP, implodes as it tries to drag itself even further to the right. Now, the UCP polls are lower than ever. The Alberta NDP is firing on all cylinders, and our members are motivated to fight back and take out this failed government early next year so that we can work with Premier Notley once again. In Manitoba, Brian Pallister has already resigned, and good riddance. He's probably on a plane to Costa Rica somewhere. But now the new PC Premier, Heather Stephenson, is completely failing workers, including those currently on strike at Manitoba Hydro and Local 681. Manitoba NDP leader Wab Kinew and his incredible team of MLAs have been doing a great job holding them to account in the legislature, and we expect great things moving forward. And in Saskatchewan, I spoke many times with NDP opposition leader Ryan Miley through this pandemic. We talked about the barely concealed anger of Scott Moe and his utter disdain for those less fortunate. Scott Moe and far too many of his supporters were disgustingly proud of having the lowest minimum wage in the country, time and time again, even after their re-election. Shame. It's such a disgrace, and they only recently bumped up the minimum wage a tiny bit, far below what it should be. Unifor also helped lead the campaign for paid vaccination leave across the country, and we finally swept the West when we saw paid vaccination leave in each province. But there was no interest whatsoever from the Prairie Premiers on paid sick days either, but we did achieve 5 paid sick days in British Columbia, the most generous of any province. A different government matters to our members and workers. We also saw the Prairie Premiers move to criminalize dissent in Alberta and in Manitoba. Bill 57 would have made it illegal to protest or picket on any property considered critical as vaguely defined by the government. Alberta Bill 1 came in directly after our Carsland secondary picketing in 2020 and the Indigenous blockades. These laws were also designed to go after environmental protesters. Imagine the hypocrisy when we saw the so-called freedom blockades in Coutts and elsewhere, when the Prairie Premiers couldn't bring themselves to crack down on what we all know is their own base. These governments are also pandering to an increasingly unhinged and dangerous fringe, including the United We Roll yellow vest fascists that we saw in Carsland while watching then Co-op CEO Scott Banda hold a press conference with them to try to break our lines. They failed then, and they will fail again. We saw the Prairie Premiers not only fail to act too little or too late, but we also saw them find time to viciously attack workers. In the first year of the pandemic, Premier Jason Kenney tabled sweeping changes to the province's health and safety laws. The devastating Bill 47 replaced the Occupational Health and Safety Act in its entirety. This included limiting the right to refuse unsafe work, capping the amount seriously injured workers are eligible to receive, and eliminating an employer's responsibility to reinstate injured workers. We always knew Jason Kenney was in the pocket of powerful employers, but attacking health and safety during a pandemic was a new low even for him. Bill 32 makes subtle but dangerous changes to the Alberta Labour Code that includes reduced access to arbitration for first contracts, provides more loopholes for cases to be dismissed, and will mean more legal costs for our local unions. Overtime hours will now be averaged over an entire year, up from 12 weeks. For many work sites, this change eliminates overtime pay altogether. It's a breathtaking theft from workers orchestrated by their premier. Shame. And we also have thousands of members in Alberta who haven't seen a fair collective agreement this entire time. Our educational support staff members in the Catholic school system in Calgary, Edmonton, and in many other communities have spent the pandemic facing demands to cut their wages, not increase them. We know the government is overriding local school boards and local administrators and sending government lackeys to the bargaining table to control the attack. I look forward to continuing the work with our members in Alberta as we throw out the UCP and bargain fair agreements that are so deserved and long overdue. And since 2019, we held the BC Regional Council in Whistler, and we held the first virtual Prairie Regional Council with full elections, and we recently held a very successful in-person council in Winnipeg in April. I've also joined with dozens of members who have participated in many lobby efforts, including for a national aerospace strategy and for better EI to help instead of punishing workers. As you've heard, Unifor is a key supporter and sponsor of the campaign to drag the Red River in Manitoba for the remains of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people. When the community organizers needed a new vessel to continue their work dragging the Red River in Winnipeg, Unifor sponsored a new purpose-built aluminum boat that launched last June 21st on National Indigenous Peoples Day. PRC Chair Guy Deforge, BC Regional Chair Leanne Marsh, and I also went out in the Drag the Red boat last summer to see firsthand the impact and the importance of the work they do, and of course to bring further donations. We also saw dozens of Unifor members join a healing walk in Winnipeg on the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th last year. There has been active and ongoing work with local union members and staff through the Mama Bear Clan to help people trying to live in unsafe encampments and bus shelters by collecting clothing, blankets, and food. It's our job across Canada to listen and to act. There is no time to waste implementing all the calls for justice from the final report of the inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people. And I want to give a big thanks again to our Indigenous liaison, National Rep Gina Smoke, and everyone on the ground who supported these important efforts. Yet, hundreds of unmarked graves have been identified since May 2021 on the grounds of former residential schools across Canada, including in Kamloops in British Columbia. Asian and Muslim communities across the country have reported a rise in racist behavior during the pandemic. We are demanding that the Prairie Premiers establish an anti-racism consultation group to provide advice and strategies to combat racism. We cannot and will not allow hate and division to shape the future of this country. It's also distressingly clear that women continue to be hit hard by the pandemic, with Indigenous and Black women, women of color, and women with disabilities being the hardest hit. Increased exposure to the virus, chance of layoff, caregiving burdens, and domestic violence are just a few examples of the gender dimension of the pandemic. It takes the average woman in Canada more than 15 months to make the same as the average man did in 12 months. Shame. We know the gap is even wider for women facing multiple and intersecting areas of discrimination. Alberta has one of the largest pay gaps in the country. It is alarming that the gap has been widening over the last 20 years. So during the pandemic, we wrote to the premiers across the West and demanded action. And with federal pay equity legislation now in force, over half of Canadian workers will be covered by proactive pay equity legislation. We've also been consulting with the BC government on pay transparency legislation, and we will keep pushing to demand equality, equity, and transparency. It's also been very distressing to see the acceleration of attacks on media workers who have been the targets of more violence and abuse recently. Our members in the media sector are victims of this abuse for simply doing their jobs, and that is wrong. Shame. This behaviour is not acceptable, and Unifor condemns the behaviour, and we stand with all of our journalists here and around the world against violence and harassment. In British Columbia, Unifor members played a pivotal role to elect a minority government under John Horgan. We threw out the BC Liberals in 2017 after 16 years of their right-wing attacks. In 2020, Unifor members on the ground worked hard to secure the largest NDP majority in history in British Columbia. We continue to engage with them on many issues, including proper assistance for our forestry workers and fish harvesters, support for our hospitality members, a stronger labour code and better employment standards, and achieving one of the highest minimum wages in the country. But we're nowhere close to being done. We've held lobbying sessions in person and virtually with over 50 MLAs and ministers, and we were successful in achieving mandatory skilled trade certification legislation as just one example. We've seen great bargaining and massive labour disputes across BC as well, including a long dispute and victory with our Rio Tinto members in Kitimat, with transit workers in Vancouver, with the longest transit strike in history in Whistler, with miners in Campbell River, concrete workers locked out in Victoria, and at the Pine River gas plant in Chetwynd, just to name a few. In Manitoba, the Conservative government has been attacking workers also since even after the last election. They filed bogus election claims against our union, but Elections Manitoba dismissed all complaints filed against Unifor. They brought in Bill 16, designed to lengthen strikes and lockouts by removing the alternative dispute resolution mechanism, which helps to stop strikes and lockouts longer than 60 days with arbitration. Thanks to much opposition, including ours, and with Manitoba NDP leader Wab Kinew, 4 of these anti-worker bills were tabled, and as the PCs backed off on those bills for now. We also fought them on the so-called Public Services Sustainability Act after winning lower court rulings that it violates the right to collective bargaining protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Manitoba government has appealed and tried to withdraw the law, and we are currently trying to get the case heard before the Supreme Court of Canada as part of a broad coalition of unions. Premier Stephenson may be a new face, but I see the same tired government failing Manitoba workers. And most recently, thanks to Unifor Local 681, who represent natural gas workers and meter readers at Manitoba Hydro, the Manitoba government got yet another black eye after an arbitrator ruled that forced layoffs were illegal. Conservative provincial governments want crown corporations and public services to fail because we know it's the pretext for privatization. I'd like to give my thanks and appreciation for the incredible work done by Unifor Local 681 President Victor Diduch and his team, not only for that arbitration victory, but for the strike they are now leading against Manitoba Hydro that is now over 50 days long. We'll have a delegation here when we honour our striking workers later this week. But it's disgraceful that they even have to strike over ridiculous wage offers that come nowhere close to the cost of living. Shame. Now, the next election in Manitoba will be held in October 2023. We know we will need volunteers from every local, from every area of the province. We need to identify them now, give them training, help deploy them, so we are sure we understand the members' needs and get them excited about the coming chance to change the government and install NDP leader Wab Kinew and his team. We fought back against Jason Kenney's United Conservative Party government, as I said, who've taken aim at the rights of working people in Alberta. From free speech to bargaining rights to workplace health and safety, laws in Alberta are being tilted against workers and making employers more powerful than ever. But yet, despite the pandemic, we've seen more engagement from the local unions in Alberta than in a long time. We have activists in Calgary, Edmonton, Fort McMurray, and all around the province who are fully aware of the damage the Jason Kenney government has done and are spreading the word. The fact sheets, meetings, and information that we have put out has been focused on one key area: the impact of those changes to the lives of regular working people and their unions. Now, I want to take a moment to explain how Bill 32 in Alberta is the biggest legislative attack on workers that we've seen in decades, and why we have to kill it here before it spreads to other provinces. This law forces every single Alberta local union with provincial certification to do a review of all of their spending and divide it up into core and non-core activities. If they designate something as non-core, they now have to go and seek consent from each individual member, one by one, to allow a local to spend that money. And even if they get consent, they have to go back every year, one by one, to get it again. And even if there are 3 or 4 different types of non-core activities, the consent is all or nothing. So you either pay your fair share for all so-called non-core activities, or you don't pay at all. This is a drastic step toward the kind of U.S. labor laws that we've seen that are designed to destroy local unions. So we've worked hard with our legal department. We formed a coalition with other unions to launch legal challenges and worked with our Alberta members to help them deal with this draconian law. And guess what we figured out? Under the crappy law the UCP has written, it's not entirely clear as to what they think is core and non-core. I know what our Alberta locals think, and so do most other unions. Everything we do is core. Absolutely everything. All of our work is core to defending our members, the working class, and improving our communities while fighting for equity and justice, all of it. Rachel Notley came to our recent in-person Prairie Regional Council in Winnipeg, and she said flat out that she will repeal all of Bill 32 as one of the first acts of her new government next year. And in the meantime, we will help defend our Alberta locals at the Labour Board if they are challenged on their decisions around core activities, and we will continue to work with the other unions and our legal coalition to challenge this law everywhere and anywhere. The April 2023 election in Alberta will take everything we've got, and I know the Alberta locals will stand with us as we take on this fight together. We simply cannot afford to lose, and we have to ensure that Unifor will help to have a big impact in the next election. In Saskatchewan, Unifor activists put on a valiant effort during the 2020 provincial election, and we helped elect some new MLAs. Our members in the Crown locals in Saskatchewan also held a massive strike and lockout in 2019, and then Unifor Local 594 faced off bravely against Co-op Refinery, who were determined to break the union. Many of you traveled from all across the country and helped out not only in Regina, but also all over at secondary pickets that we put up all across the province and in Carsland, Winnipeg, and Prince George. I want to thank all of the activists across the country for their incredible service during that dispute. And as you know, I was arrested in Regina on that picket line in January 2020 and charged, along with many others, as we all stood up for our members in Unifor Local 594 in the freezing cold, watching scabs steal their work and being delivered by helicopter. Shame. But by the way, all of those who were charged, including myself, subsequently had all charges dropped. But we will never stop speaking out against ruthless employers and against scabs. Threats and intimidation don't scare us, and we will fight back stronger each time. And after the recent federal election, Unifor called on the Liberals and the NDP to work together to benefit workers, with anti-scab legislation as a critical component of that cooperation agreement. I met with Jagmeet Singh virtually several times and made it clear where Unifor stood with anti-scab legislation, very high on the list of immediate items we sought. Now, as you know, the federal Liberals and NDP have announced an agreement to commit to passing anti-scab legislation at the federal level for strikes and lockouts by the end of 2023. And while we support this commitment, Unifor members know the urgent need for real anti-scab protections now. Workers in Canada can't wait until the end of 2023. What about all the disputes that may occur between now and then? Scabs should be outlawed today, in every province, in every jurisdiction. Effective anti-scab legislation is critical to all of our success at each and every bargaining table. Bargaining where your job isn't immediately outsourced is a recipe for safer picket lines and more respectful bargaining for all. It is critical that we win this battle nationwide, federally, and in each province, and Unifor will get it done. I also want to congratulate all of our rail members on their new agreement with Via Rail, our committees who worked so hard for their members, and the members who supported them with massive strike mandates, and I know they were more than ready to hit the bricks at the strike deadline. Workers at Via are putting forward a vision for a strong, well-funded public passenger rail service in Canada, and we've launched a national campaign to oppose privatization efforts in any part of the rail network. We need to grow, not cut. We need to keep it public, not sell it off to any greedy corporations. And so despite the new agreement, that threat isn't over, and we held a rally in Winnipeg recently at Prairie Regional Council, and we will continue to support this very important campaign. Now on organizing. We've seen progress in organizing, but each gain tells us that there are more workers out there looking for our help. We recently held an organizing summit in Winnipeg to discuss ways we can ramp up our organizing efforts. To name just one positive result, after a massive campaign, the organizing department was successful in organizing WestJet in Calgary and Vancouver. We welcome into Unifor Local 531, one of our first new local unions under WestJet, and I want to congratulate their bargaining committee on achieving and ratifying their very first collective agreement. And of course, Toronto WestJet workers also just got certified, and we look forward to working with more and more WestJet workers. And we mentioned CLAC earlier. We also saw a large unit of Regardez security screeners, 700 members at the Calgary airport, become liberated from CLAC and join Local 2002. I'd like to thank all the staff in our organizing department who've worked so hard on so many important campaigns. It's up to all of us to support their efforts, grow these efforts, magnify the work by working hand in hand with our locals, and organize like never before. And in British Columbia, we have achieved another important gain in the past few months to help organizing on this scale. As many of you know, I helped to organize my own workplace in 1998 using CardCheck, or single-step certification. CardCheck protects workers from intimidation that we continue to see every day as organizing ramps up. The NDP government in power at the time had legislation that workers wanting to join a union simply had to sign a confidential card. And if they reached 55% of all the workers in the bargaining unit, the Labour Board would verify that and issue a certification without the need for a further vote and sparing the workers from any further threats. Now, of course, employers didn't like that, and when the NDP lost power in 2001 to the BC Liberals, they ripped up not only most of the Employment Standards Code, they ripped out CardCheck certification within 3 months of taking office. And of course, union certification rates went down and unfair labour practices went up. We have waited over 21 years, and we have never given up fighting to get it back. Unifor activists in BC were relentless, demanding that this law come back at no more than 55% as an urgent item. I met with Premier Horgan and his Labour Minister many times to echo this demand, but we also focused as a group on every single minister and every NDP MLA, many times calling for immediate action. So I'm very happy to report I recently received a letter from Premier Horgan in May telling us that CardCheck certification was back at 55%, that the bill had passed and it would receive royal assent, and it became the law again on June 2nd of this year. And Premier Horgan also included a copy of the bill, and he personally signed it to us. And then he took a big black marker and he signed it all over the front of the bill, and he said, "Gavin, now let's get organizing." And indeed we will. in greater numbers than ever before as we scale up our efforts to help workers. I am so proud of everyone who pushed so hard for this gain for years, and it is truly a demand that we force them to accept, whether they like it or not. And that's the message that all politicians must learn about Unifor and our members. We are strong, we are proud, we can fight back, and we will fight back. If you want to be our friend as a politician, a commitment to anti-scab legislation has to be a starting point. A commitment to improve organizing laws and repealing anti-worker laws everywhere is another. Protecting and respecting workers, their safety, and the most vulnerable among us has to be an ongoing effort, and we will not be satisfied with tokens. We need change, real change. Our equity and justice demands are not mere words. They are calls to action, and we insist on action, not symbols. And although we've all been through the fire together and back in these past few years, I know that we will emerge from all of this stronger than ever, because we can see a better world. We can win together. We will continue our commitment to our ideals and our vision. We will grow like never before, and we will move forward together. Thank you so much, everyone, for your tremendous work and solidarity.